The atmosphere of the gas giant does not welcome the Earth, it consumes it. A wall of violet and deep ochre clouds towers hundreds of kilometers into the blackness of space, illuminated from within by lightning bolts the size of entire continents. There is no impact in the traditional sense, no solid ground to strike, only an endless, crushing descent into a high-pressure nightmare. The sky above the Earth is no longer blue, it is a bruised, swirling vortex of hydrogen and helium that has begun to strip away the very air we breathe. Above the great red spot, the friction of our world's entry into the Jovian envelope creates a shroud of superheated plasma, a glowing shroud that incinerates the ozone layer in a fraction of a heartbeat. Every forest on the planet ignites simultaneously, as the radiant heat from the compressed gases reaches temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. The oceans do not just evaporate, they flash boil into pillars of steam that are immediately torn apart by 1,000 km/h winds. Skyscrapers do not merely fall, they are ground into dust by the sheer weight of an atmosphere 300 times denser than our own. This is the end. But to understand why, we must rewind to the beginning. Before the first tremor, before the sky changed color, there was the silent, invisible hand of gravity. Earth exists in a delicate celestial dance, held in a stable orbit by the balance between its forward momentum and the pull of the sun. But in this scenario, that balance is shattered. A gravitational anomaly, perhaps a passing rogue star or a shift in the outer solar system, nudges the Earth out of its comfortable groove. We begin a slow, spiraling descent toward the king of planets. At first, the changes are subtle. Jupiter, usually a bright dot in the night sky, begins to grow. Over the course of several months, it expands from a distant light to a disk as large as the Moon, then 10 times larger, then 20. For the people on the surface, the initial stages of this cosmic encounter are defined by a strange, unsettling beauty. The tides are the first to notice. As the Earth crosses the Roche limit of the Jovian system, the gravitational pull of the gas giant begins to tug on our oceans with more force than our own moon ever could. Coastal cities see the water recede kilometers away from the shore, only to return in a wall of water hundreds of meters high. These are not waves, they are shifts in the Earth's very shape. The planet begins to stretch, bulging at the equator as Jupiter's gravity attempts to turn our sphere into an egg. This process, known as tidal heating, begins to frictionally cook the interior of the Earth. The mantle, once semi-solid, liquefies. Volcanism explodes across every continent. Dormant peaks in the Andes, the Cascades, and the Himalayas roar back to life, spewing billions of tons of ash into the stratosphere, blocking out the sun even as Jupiter's massive form begins to eclipse the entire sky. The Moon is the first casualty of this approach. As Earth enters the Jovian orbital neighborhood, the Moon is caught in a gravitational tug-of-war it cannot win. It is ripped from our orbit and either flung into deep space or shattered into a billion fragments of ice and rock, forming a temporary, glittering ring around our dying world. Without the Moon to stabilize our tilt, the Earth's axis begins to wobble violently. Seasons vanish, replaced by chaotic weather patterns where the temperature swings 100 degrees Celsius in a single day. As we draw closer, the sheer scale of Jupiter becomes terrifying. It is no longer a planet in the sky, it is the sky itself. The Great Red Spot, a storm 3 times the size of our entire world, looms like a lidless eye of orange and crimson. The magnetic field of Jupiter, a gargantuan shield of radiation, begins to interact with our own magnetosphere. This is not a gentle meeting. The Earth's magnetic shield is crushed and peeled back, exposing the surface to a lethal stream of high-energy particles. The sky glows with permanent, blinding auroras that dance from pole to equator in shades of neon green, electric blue, and haunting violet. This radiation is so intense that it fries the electrical grids of the world in a single afternoon. Every satellite falls from orbit, burning up like tiny shooting stars as the upper atmosphere begins to swell. We are now within the orbit of the Galilean moons. Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto pass by like silent sentinels, their own surfaces scarred by the same gravitational torment we are now enduring. The Earth is moving at over 60 kilometers per second, pulled by the immense mass of a world 318 times more massive than our own. At this distance, the physics of our world begin to fail. The atmosphere is no longer held down by Earth's gravity alone. Jupiter is literally breathing us in. The top layers of our oxygen and nitrogen are siphoned off, flowing upward into the Jovian void in a long, wispy tail of blue gas. On the ground, the air grows thin and cold, even as the ground beneath our feet turns to molten glass from the internal tidal friction. The final descent begins with a roar that can be felt in the marrow of the bone. As Earth touches the outer fringes of the Jovian exosphere, the silence of space is replaced by the scream of atmospheric re-entry on a planetary scale. This is not the entry of a small capsule, this is the collision of two atmospheres. The kinetic energy is converted into heat at a rate that defies human comprehension. The air around the Earth is compressed so suddenly and so violently that it turns into a white-hot plasma. The temperature at the leading edge of the planet spikes to 30,000 degrees Celsius. This heat does not travel through the air, it arrives as a wall of pure radiation, vaporizing the surface of the continents before the shockwave even hits. The crust of the Earth, already fractured by volcanic activity, begins to buckle. The granite and basalt foundations of the world soften and melt. In the centers of the great oceans, the water does not evaporate into the air, it is forced into a supercritical state, where it is neither liquid nor gas, but a high-pressure fluid that dissolves the seafloor. The pressure of Jupiter's atmosphere is now increasing exponentially. At the level where Earth is currently descending, the pressure is already 10 times that of the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Every hollow space on Earth, caves, subways, basements, is crushed instantly. Most turn away from the void. But here at Velastrix, we decode the math behind the chaos. Join the archive by subscribing now. As we sink deeper into the Jovian depths, the darkness becomes absolute, broken only by the flickering glow of the Earth's own melting crust. We are now several hundred kilometers below the visible cloud tops. The light from the sun is gone, extinguished by thousands of kilometers of thick hydrogen gas. The Earth is no longer a planet, it is a cooling ember, a teardrop of molten rock falling through a sea of gas. The crushing weight of the Jovian atmosphere is now so great that it begins to flatten the Earth. The planet is being squeezed from all sides by a pressure of 100 million pascals. At these depths, the physics of Jupiter become even more alien. We are approaching the layer of metallic hydrogen. Here, the pressure is so intense that hydrogen atoms are squeezed together until their electrons are freed, allowing the gas to conduct electricity like a liquid metal. The Earth, a ball of iron and silicate rock, is now falling through a liquid metal ocean that makes up the bulk of Jupiter's interior. The friction of our passage through this dense medium generates a secondary wave of heat that begins to dissolve the Earth's mantle entirely. The iron core of our planet, the dense heart that once generated our magnetic field, is now the only thing that remains somewhat intact. But even the core cannot withstand the ultimate fate of this descent. As we reach the deeper layers, thousands of kilometers below the clouds, the temperature rises to 20,000 degrees Celsius, and the pressure reaches millions of bars. The silicate rocks of the Earth's mantle are no longer solid or even liquid, they are broken down into their constituent atoms, oxygen, silicon, magnesium, and absorbed into the swirling metallic hydrogen of Jupiter. The Earth is being digested. Our world is being dismantled atom by atom, mixed into the chemical soup of the giant planet. The iron core of the Earth continues to fall for a time, a heavy leaden weight seeking the very center of the Jovian gravity well. But Jupiter's own core is a place of even more extreme conditions. Whether it is a solid ball of rock and ice or a fuzzy region of dissolved heavy elements, the result for Earth is the same. The remnants of our world, the iron that once sat at our center, the carbon that once made up our bodies, the gold that we once mined from the Earth, are scattered across the vast interior of the gas giant. There is no trace of the Earth left. It has been incorporated into the mass of Jupiter, increasing the giant's weight by a tiny fraction of a percent. The storms above continue as if nothing happened. The great red spot swirled for 300 years before our arrival, and it will swirl for thousands more after we are gone. The momentary flash of light and the brief disturbance in the cloud bands caused by our entry are soon smoothed over by the relentless winds of the Jovian atmosphere. From the perspective of the rest of the solar system, the Earth has simply ceased to exist. The third rock from the Sun is gone, and the king of planets remains, slightly heavier, slightly more complex in its chemistry, but otherwise indifferent. The erasure of the Earth would cause a ripple effect through the remaining planets. the gravitational balance of the inner solar system would be permanently altered. Mars might find its orbit shifting, potentially swinging closer to the Sun or being flung outward toward the asteroid belt. Venus and Mercury would feel the loss of their neighbor, their paths through the void subtly changing over millions of years. The solar system would eventually settle into a new equilibrium, a new dance that does not include us. Reflecting on this catastrophe reveals the profound fragility of our existence. We live on a thin crust of cooled rock, shielded by a fragile bubble of air, suspended in a void that is governed by forces of unimaginable scale. Our entire history, every war, every discovery, every work of art, and every life ever lived, depends on the Earth remaining in its precise, stable orbit. We are a part of a clockwork mechanism so vast that a single gear slipping could result in the erasure of everything we have ever known. To see Earth fall into Jupiter is to see the absolute insignificance of the biological against the cosmic. It is a reminder that we are guests in a universe that does not care for our survival, governed by laws of physics that are as beautiful as they are terrifying. To explore the impossible and visualize the unknown, subscribe to Velastrix.